Welcome. This is a particular pleasure for me today to introduce Benjamin Piper. I was trying to think, and I should have asked you this respectfully time this morning, but it feels like I've been doing that for a long time. Almost, maybe not quite since graduate school days, but nearly that. And Ben Piper is part of the IEDP.PennGSE speaker series. We'll be talking about teaching and teacher change, of course, one of the most important topics we have in education in general, and of course in graduate school education. I usually don't read from somebody's CV, but I'm just going to take one paragraph out of this because it's hard to ad-lib. There are some complexities in it, so let me just say a few words about this and then a couple more general words. Benjamin Piper is chief of party. It may some of us think we have a very good title, but it has a technical meaning. Chief of party of the Primary Math and Reading PRIMR initiative in Kenya. If you were at CIES, how many people were at the Comparative International Education Society? Yay, Ben. I think we were the most prominent university presence there among graduate students. So with funding from USAID from 2011 to 2014 and from the UK Department of International Development for some additional years, this project is designed to test low-cost and scalable approaches to improving reading and math outcomes. It also looks at ICT, that is technology investments, the importance of books, lesson plans, training, and importance of the impact of mother tongue programs in Kenya. His previous research investigated the impact in Ethiopia of teacher professional development. He's also worked with the World Bank, with funding from the World Bank, the UNICEF, and Save the Children. Now that is a technical presentation of Ben Piper, and in my view, he's one of the people who is doing the most interesting work in the field of international education. He hails from, I'm sorry, Amina is not here today, but he comes from a similar kind of background. In his case, he was in Cambridge and Harvard, did his degree at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. He's been working in Kenya for the last 3 to 4 years. Importantly, as I discovered both plowing through the CV and having a conversation last evening, he started out as an elementary school teacher in Greenville, South Carolina. Didn't be anything south, just sort of one or the other. But he has worked at, I'm from Chicago, it all seems pretty south down. He has worked in Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Liberia, Ghana, Malawi, and Tanzania. Whenever I see Dan at these international meetings, it is as if we are on a similar kind of wavelength. And so I thought, I've been trying, as some of you may know, I've been trying for 3 years to get Ben to give a talk here. And so we are finally glad that there's a convergence of stars so that you are with us today. Ben, welcome. It will be 40, 45 minutes, then open questions for about 30 minutes. We will stop at 4:30 sharp.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin Piper. As Dan said, I work in Kenya, but I am someone who really believes in the field of work that we do in international education. We have the privilege of supporting the quality of education for children across this globe. So I want to start off by saying that I'm just privileged to be here with you and thankful for the opportunity to present on some of the research we've been doing in Kenya. So I'm primarily presenting on research from the Kenya project that Dan talked about, but we also have had the ability and the opportunity to work in a variety of projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, etc. So we won't talk about all those, but there's some other contexts that might be of interest to you if you care about some countries more than others. So I want to tell you the whole point of my talk right now, so you can leave if you need to leave. Basically, it's this first idea, the idea of teacher change. Who here has been a teacher? Yes? Who here went to training when you were a teacher? Been to any professional development programs as a teacher? Okay. Who here at the end of the professional development program learned everything you were supposed to learn? Why is everyone hands go down? Who learned everything they were supposed to have learned during the training? No, when I was a teacher, 4th grade, 8th grade teacher in inner cities, at the end of the training, I knew everything I was supposed to. You gave me a test, I would score 100%. Okay? Who here, when you left the training that you had attended, that you learned everything you were supposed to learn, went back and taught using the methods that that professional development person gave you? Okay, 2 out of the 30 we started with. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, is the process by which teachers decide whether or not to change their behavior. It's not about us changing teachers, it's about the process by which they decide and make decisions around the technical things we try and give them to improve their practice. Because they're rational beings, just like we are on the training side, and that they're seeing a variety of different information, they're receiving a variety of different trainings, and they are deciding which of them to listen to. They're deciding whether or not to change. And so what we want to talk about today is our project in the context of that question of how can you help a teacher to change their behavior in a way that might improve the quality of learning in Kenya. So this is an overview of our talk today. We're going to get some background information, a little bit of theory, because I know your grad students will love theory, the impact of the program on literacy, and then a little bit about cost effectiveness. We'll have some time talking about a qualitative case study on education. I'm actually, my advisor in my graduate program was a quantitative methodologist, but in my heart, I think I'm a mixed methods researcher, someone who loves looking at things, particular problems from different methodological perspectives. And then we'll look at some of the randomized control trials from an ICT intervention we've done, and then some overall reflections. So that's quite a bit to cover in 40 minutes, so I'll talk fast. Please feel free to interrupt or ask questions as we go through. But fundamentally, we want to talk about this setting, this sort of classroom, this sort of child, and can we improve the quality of instruction that they get so that she can have better outcomes in school. There's a real problem. This is data from Kenya. These are different counties in Kenya. Kenya is probably, I would argue, the highest performing public education system in Eastern, Central, and probably even Southern Africa. So that said, I want to show you the percentages of kids, these are percentages, who scored 0 words on a Dibbles type learning assessment task. Okay, so Nairobi, capital of Kenya, what percentage of kids in end of grade 2 cannot read at all? Someone give me a number. 30. Okay, someone else give me a number. So you can do 20. So let's see who's right. It's 20% in Nairobi. This one now is non-formal settings. These are the slums inside of Nairobi. It's going to be higher or lower than the formal sector. Slum areas, low-cost private schools, higher or lower. I need everybody to participate. So thumbs up for higher or thumbs down for lower. Okay? You're mostly wrong. It's exactly the same. It doesn't particularly matter in Nairobi whether you're going to a public or a non-formal school. Your outcomes are pretty similar. These are just 0 scores, but in general, outcomes are similar. These are then 5 large counties with different levels of poverty. Most of them are kind of average or below average. But on average, across our sample over 3 years, we're seeing that 50% of class 2 kids given a simple Dibbles type task are not able to read a word. And the highest performing education system in Eastern Central Africa. So take a deep breath and let that sink in. That's a significant problem. So it's in that context that our program was designed. It supports 1,384 schools with funding from 2 big donors. As I said, I'm a mixed methodologist, but really do believe in the ability of randomized controlled trials to help answer some questions. They are not the only way to do research, but in the case we have very large countries, and the ability to only do a certain number of schools, using randomization does allow you to have a higher chance of having causal inference. But I do think that in this context, we'll be able to integrate some of the findings from qualitative research. We've been tasked to improve the quality of education across several languages and math, and we've had to do that amongst all of those subjects within 10 days of training a year, maximum. Can't go above that. So if you, in most of our programs, we're doing either 3 or 4 subjects, divide 3 or 4 subjects by 10 days, and you basically have 2 or 3 days per subject to train people for a year. We've trained over 5,000 teachers in this January, and we're trying to do the cost such that at the end of the day, when our program is done, we use the budgets that the country already has. That includes their training budget, their book budget, their supervision budget. We've decided to constrain ourselves to the funds they can use when we're gone, which is, I think, a decision that, and sometimes I regret, but what decisions we made. So I want to talk to you about some of the relationships between outcomes. In this case, oral reading fluency. We could do this measure across comprehension, a bunch of other measures, but fluency shows the most variation. So I want to show you some teacher practices that are related to fluency. So things that are that way, if they exist, outcomes are higher. Things that are this way, if they exist, outcomes are lower. So if the teacher uses the book only twice a week, whatever book it is, whether it's our book or another book in the system, kids learn less than 8 words less fluently per minute. So what does that mean? Using the book is good in classrooms. Teacher expects decoding in class 4. That means that you ask teachers when you think the kids should be able to decode new words. If they think they only should decode new words in class 4, their kids in class 1 or 2 do what? Do much worse because their expectations are very low for those kids. Ratio matters when they expect the kids to do letters, not having a well-prepared class. Class size is actually a very small, statistically insignificant effect. Increasing, there's 10 more kids or graduate students in this room, my lecture would be no better or worse because I'm lecturing, right? So if you increase the class size, it doesn't make much difference. I think that's a pretty standard finding now in other countries. The teacher having a very significant degree has a slightly positive effect. Teacher using the book daily has an effect. Teacher has other qualifications. That literally means teachers not trained. Teachers who are not trained do better than teachers who are very well trained and do better at the 0 mark from teachers who have the official training degree. So one of you guys will sort out why that's the case. There's some of the things that really make a difference in checking homework, copying from the blackboard only once a week. If you copy from the blackboard 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, your kids do worse. If you only use the blackboard for copying recitation only once a week, your kids do better. And sounding out words daily as a class, your kids do better. So there are some real instructional behavior practices that are related to outcomes. That's the real point of this slide, is that what a teacher does matters for how well kids do. So the question then that drives the entirety of our program is how best do we support a teacher who's being trained by us to decide to change their behavior on a consistent and structured basis. So I want to give you some bad news. First of all, you see the title of this one? I'm going to basically argue that in the international development realm, we have fundamentally produced 10 to 15 years of failed professional development strategies, basically. And there's a variety of reasons that I think that. I think that one of them is that education is a loosely coupled system. If you rank education across other fields, we have far less power over the bottom than most other ones. Okay? You have far less power over what happens on the day-to-day process for teachers than most other professionals. Elmore argues that system reform very seldom changes the instructional core. That's how he'd say it, the instructional core, the relationship between the kid, the teacher, and the stuff. All these beautiful things of decentralization and school-based management hasn't fundamentally changed how teachers behave and what they teach. Teachers resist change. This is a study of 100 years of American education by Cuban, which basically says teachers are logical. They know that your fad will be superseded by your fad, which will be superseded by your fad. So I'm going to just outlast all the fads and do what I want to do. Right? So there's a lot of resistance to change, but this is not to blame them. This is just them being rational agents. Fundamentally, like this body of research by Maria Teresa Tatu basically argues that professional development must reflect the classroom. One of the problems we have in professional development in Sub-Saharan Africa is that we have situations where we train teachers which are fundamentally different from what they will go back to. So we train them in a nice, beautiful setting like this where we have our coffee and we have couches, and then you're going to go back to your classroom with 50 kids, and what you did here is so fundamentally different from what you'll do there that you can't make that link very easily. Also, the contact time matters more than the content. In fact, we take this a little bit further. I actually don't care whether or not our teachers have learned something when they're in our class. What I want them to be able to do is have enough time with somebody else who's like them, with somebody else who's tried these sort of methods, to maybe increase the likelihood of them doing it in the school. There's a recent meta-analysis of the impacts of professional development in international development, and that says that the average professional development program, ignoring cost, has an impact of around 0.2 standard deviations. This is across probably 40 studies, many of which they rejected because of methodological issues. Similarly, there's another I3 funded study of professional development programs in languages and math that say on both subjects, the average effect size you expect to see is 0.15 to 0.2 or so. Some are 0, some are more around that range. And this is Ben talking. My fundamental view is that teaching is a very unique profession. Think of another profession where you have so little time with any other adult observing you do your job. Okay? Most of you have been teachers, except in this case right now where Dan is watching me, Michelle is watching me, there's people watching me. A typical teacher is watched by no one, right? The head teacher might peek their head in the door. I was a first-year teacher in a Title I school with more than 95% free and reduced lunch kids, and guess how many times I was observed? 1/2 of a lesson for my first year of teaching. If I was a good teacher or a bad teacher, it was just by luck. So it's a really unique profession. If you think about nurses, if you think about anything else, you have some more time when someone else observes you. You have little time discussing the profession, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa. There's little time for you as a group that's structured to be able to argue or interact with others. There's very little time receiving feedback. If you're not observed, you're not likely to get feedback. And when you are given feedback, particularly if you follow Kenya's quality assurance guidelines, the sort of things they typically focus on, was the teacher audible? By the way, am I being audible?
Yes.
Yes? So if you were a Kenyan quality assurance officer, so far so good. Teacher was audible. The writing was legible. Is my writing legible? So far so good. So the sort of things that are expected or focused on during the observations that typically exist are not related to the instructional quality of the teachers. And I think that's a pretty unique thing amongst education compared to other professions, or teaching compared to other professions. So we're heavily influenced by Thomas Guskey's work, Teacher Change Model. Yes, sir.
Ben, you said you wouldn't mind interruptions for factual questions.
No problem.
Most of the PD stuff in a lot of countries does depend heavily on the assumption about the relative stability of the teachers in place,
Yes.
or the relative stability of the teaching the same courses from one year to the next.
Yes.
Not being switched around, yanked around, and so on. Do you have a sense for Kenyan teachers about what that stability looks like?
Yeah, turnover in Kenya is pretty low.
Is it?
I think the most recent data I've seen shows about 3% turnover a year, which is actually extraordinarily low. I think it's because there's actually a lot of teachers. Kenya is actually exporting teachers, particularly to Rwanda and Uganda. So actually quite a few teachers. And the way the structure is in early primary, you're a self-contained teacher like we're used to here in the US. There is some hope for some teachers that they will get promoted to the upper primary, but you have to get another qualification to do that. And getting another qualification requires money. So primary teaching is pretty stable, but it does have some interesting kind of particularities. One is that a lot of, let me say this nicely, a lot of more experienced, but very, very, very much more experienced teachers get assigned to the early grades. This is a very exam-heavy structure, so class 8 is the real emphasis, class 7 is the second emphasis, and it goes down in order of importance. So if you find a teacher who's getting ready to retire, you put them in class 1 or 2. So it's typically by people who've been there and been pretty stable in their careers, and are even much, and therefore are probably even more difficult to change than the average teacher. Thank you. So this is important. If you guys haven't read Thomas Guskey and you're interested in this sort of thing, I think it's a fundamental model. I think quite a few of the papers that I saw on CAS have mentioned this model. Basically, our view of how teachers change behavior is completely contrary to how he thinks about it. We think about, you have a teacher who needs to know something, you go teach them the thing, then that lady goes and teaches the thing to their kids, right? So you don't have skill, you give them skill, they use the skill. Guskey basically argues that professional development, if you're lucky, will lead to changing the classroom practice. But the teacher still has not changed. It's only after they've done the change in classroom practice that they then, using the metrics that they devise, which might necessarily be the continuous assessment methods that you guys have learned about, If they determine that there was a change in student outcomes, which this arrow doesn't always happen, right? You can have them try something and it doesn't show any impact by their metrics and they never go past that. But if they learned it, if they tried it, if they evaluate that it's had an impact, then they might change their behavior. But many of our trainings fail at ever making this change, right? We fail to ever get them to try it. And if they never try it, they'll never have an impact on student outcomes, and then they'll never change. But we focus so much of our time and energy in international development on this process right here, just training them about this stuff. That my point, basically, is that the teacher doesn't change until this interaction here. And by the way we structure our professional development, we train them for 10 days, and then they go off by themselves. The time at which they make their decision whether or not to change, we are long since gone. Does that make sense? We're focusing here, they're deciding there, there's no interaction in the decision making. So we argue there's a continuum of teachers change. There are some teachers who will say yes to your ideas. Some, I'd argue around 20%, the superstars. Some will say no matter how fancy or wonderful your new idea is, doesn't matter what you say, they're not going to do it. Okay? And so we have maybes in the middle. I would make the case that much of international development teacher training is targeting which group? You're either targeting the no's or you're targeting the yeses, right? The yeses are going to do it anyway. The no's will never do it. So we are trying to organize ourselves to target the maybes. Because if you do something that's for the yeses, you're going to make a complicated thing, right? These people will make new materials or do wall charts. When I was the first, I learned the 4 blocks method. Anybody ever learned the 4 blocks method as a teacher? I had wall charts, I had pocket charts, I had big books, I'd have like 7 hands for all the different materials I was using. So if we devise programs like that for the yeses, these maybes will say, this is too complicated, I'm not going to do that. So basically we have these yeses are going to say yes, no's, and the question is, can you change those maybes, the undecideds, so to speak, to a yes. And we think that the way you do that is by making it simple and making it targeted and focused on our day-to-day practice. So, all that is background. Now we talk about training for change. There was an African Education Initiative report that focused on the failure of professional development in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the basic things it focused on were moving away from modules. So many programs in international development will see that there's a need for teachers to know something. They'll make a module, teachers using reading in the content areas. So it's a 40-page module, then you give it to this group of teachers and that group of teachers, and they do something with it, which will magically become improved instruction. I'm being both sarcastic but also serious, that's really what we've done in international development. Make a module, give it some teachers, have them talk about it, and then they'll change practice. We should also move away from content coverage. It's not about how much you can fit into this, like right now, 45 minutes. It's about how much you can help them change. So, training for change, the basic model is simple. When you're in a training, the trainers are modeling, they're not talking, they're not giving a lecture about the ideas, they're modeling the sort of behavior you want to see in the classroom. Then you spend the majority of your time in the training with the teachers practicing. If I've modeled a good instructional routine for 10 minutes, then you as a group will do that same instructional routine together. And what you're doing there is you're having them practice the behaviors you want to see after you leave the training. And then you're also, because you're not making this training very long, because it's not about the content that they receive during the training, you're also saving money for the thing that has the biggest chance of impact, which is the follow-up of the teachers after they're trying their behavior. So you can meet the teachers at the decision-making point and help them professionally discuss and think through how and whether those things can change. So how do we do it? We have 4 main things: books at a 1-to-1 ratio, teachers' guides, which are on the rate continuum of scripted, unscripted, more on the scripted side, less than they were last year. Teacher training, kind of the typical large group, but with this kind of new modality, and then instructional support. So we probably spend, when we had our initial budget, we took our teacher training budget, cut it in half, and spend that half on instructional support in a variety of ways. And one of the things we've just started now is trying to really focus on having them practice the sorts of things you want to see in classrooms, is that when you're doing PRIMR training, before the end of the week, you have to have a signed mastery card. So in your groups, you really have to practice this new alphabetic principle routine, a segmenting task, because it's you who's going to assign hers. And so you can't actually move on past the training until you've done that thing well enough for your other compatriots to actually be able to have this signed off on. This is something, an innovation that we've tried that's really helped. So there's a real intensity to our practice when we're at our training. So there's some entry points to influence change. If we really want to be there when the teachers change their behavior, we want to give them instructional feedback. So that means the coach or there's different titles in different countries, cluster supervisor, PA, or in Malawi, different things, giving them feedback on how they're teaching, simplifying their life, as I said, not having 7 different materials, being very careful about what you choose and what you don't, and incorporating instructional improvement into the teacher's career process. I know a lot of countries are reinvigorating and reevaluating how they help teachers improve their career, and if you can relate that to instructional quality, you can find ways to change teachers. Changing the book, in many countries that I love, the book is the curriculum. So if you can get that book better, you can improve the quality of teaching. Peer discussions, having ways for teachers to interact. By the way, I'm an opinionated person, and I'm a teacher. And the way you're going to convince me of anything is not by sitting in front of me and telling me. It's by sitting in front of me and having 3 other really smart people talking to me, telling me how it was, telling me how they agree or disagree, how they tried that thing in the classroom, and then that interaction is how I get convinced, not up here listening to somebody talk. That's how people learn. Community demand, we really try to build community demand so that the teachers are interacting with the community around quality. And then adult learning. I think that's one of the things we failed, at least in the international development field, about changing teachers, is we don't treat them like adults. Adults don't learn like kids. You don't learn by sitting and listening, filling out the module and signing all that the content that we typically do. You learn by interaction, you learn by debate, you learn by experience sharing, you learn by thinking through what it looks like on the ground. This is one of our peer discussion groups where they're arguing, and hopefully someone's changing. So, instructional support, simple inputs, termly trainings, monthly teacher meetings, making instruction a conversation. One of the things we try and do within our system is having instruction be the water cooler talk. Okay? I walk around our office and I ask people loudly, so how was the lesson you saw today? So they have to tell me how the lesson was, what was good, what was bad. So we're talking as a technical team about instruction. They're talking down to the TAC tutor about instruction. The teachers are talking to the TAC tutor about instruction. We're talking about quality, rather than all the other things that we do to improve quality, but really focusing there. After you observe me, you debrief for 10 to 15 minutes, focused support on 2 or 3 points. And then we're tying money to instructional support. These government people have transport reimbursements. We are taking those transport reimbursement funds and reorganizing them so that they have incentives for far off schools. We can talk about that later. And then using tablets, at least in Kenya, we're using tablets to assist in this instructional support process, which we can look at in depth a bit later. And then Monday matters. What do I mean by Monday matters? What that means is that your training ends on Friday or Saturday, and what matters is whether or not that teacher is well prepared on Monday to do the thing you talked about. If on Monday, after your training is done, they don't feel confident to teach that week 1, day 1, lesson 1 that you talked about, your training is almost for naught. It's have they been built up enough to have enough confidence in themselves and the methods to be able to teach on Monday. So Monday matters. So the question is, did it work? I'm talking all this fancy stuff, but did it have any effect on outcomes? This is our sample.
I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand, knocking down the time of this direct instruction exchanges, dedicating that half of the money to the instructional support. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's stuff out there. But, you also said that there's a decrease in the content coverage, and instead there's a lot more discussion. Is that where the substitute?
No, in the training is a lot more practice.
Ah.
Modeling and practice. So if we're going to talk about vocabulary, for example, I'm going to tell you a little bit about receptive and productive vocabulary and differences. Yeah. Then I'm going to give an example of how I do a vocabulary lesson, looking at different words and talking about how you use some examples in those words and making a picture walk in a story. I'll do that mini lesson for 5 minutes. Then you in groups will practice something similar here. So did it work? This is a sample. It's a relatively large sample. We're using tablets to assess. So this is one of our assessors doing a task with a kid. This is a big table with effects. We have all of our tasks here. For example here, letter sound fluency. This is primary control. These are end-line results after randomized control trial after a year and a half. 47 versus 28. 47 is bigger than 28. And the effect size is 0.63. That's overall. This is for Kiswahili, and we have effects across all the measures. Some of the larger effects are on reading comprehension. And the one I really like is just the percentage of kids who are really reading, at the ministry's benchmark. Basically, across sectors and grades and years and non-formal, formal, the kids are between 2 and 3.5 times more likely to read a benchmark than the control.
And randomly assigned in schools?
Randomly assigned at the zone level, not the school.
At the zone level?
The zone level, so a group of 10 to 15 schools that is supervised by one TAC tutor. And it's that TAC tutor who we train to train.
Yep.
It's that tutor who does all the observations, not us. So basically effect size overall is 0.35, 0.39, 0.36. So for English, something similar. Effect size 0.46, 0.47, 0.49. Substantively, what does that mean? If you know anything about the developing country, or at least Kenya's outcomes, the average fluency rate in class 2 is 59. Nobody here must have seen the literature, because 59 is unbelievably high. We're seeing many country level outcomes of 6, 7, 9 words a minute. So it means that 60% of kids are 0 readers, and compared to 47. But also comprehension is fundamentally what we care about, and it's not great, but it's significantly higher than it was. And about 40% of the kids are reading at the ministry's benchmark, which is more than twice as high as the control. So for comparison, where do those effects relate to kind of that more recent meta-analysis of instructional improvement programs? So these are negative, this is 0, this red line is 0.2, or a little less than 0.2, these are there. So where does this program fit in? That's English, that's Kiswahili. So there's basically 2 studies that have shown higher impacts on learning in language. So progress across the distribution, you should never, when people come to you and give a lecture like this and just tell you mean scores, never let them get away with it, okay? Always ask for how's the progress across the distribution, because you can hide a lot of fake changes by having noise either at the bottom or the top. So next time, you should raise your hand and say, Dr. Piper, I'm not letting you get away with that. Tell me where the progress is in the distribution. So here, these are 0 scores. There's still some kids who are 0 scores. They were 26 at the baseline. They're 7 now. I'm just going to fly through this. Basically, we have some big effects. We're basically halving the numbers of 0 scores and doubling the numbers of real readers. So we're seeing change across the distribution. Not as much as we want, but definitely more than we expected, actually. But how about cost? Cost really matters in Kenya. Kenya is a relatively well-funded system. The average per pupil expenditure is around, for instructional materials and training, is around $12 per kid per year, which is quite high. Books in Kenya are readily available, and they cost around $5 per book. So these are different subjects and different grades. Average is around $5 per book. So we got books, full color, front cover, 150 pages. So let me say those things again. You'll tell me how much it costs. Full color, 150 pages, art map, front and back, thread sewn binding, full color inside, stories, pictures. How much does it cost? In Kenya? $5. No, 80 cents. So this is in shillings, so I don't know the conversion, but we printed books this year at a pretty small scale for 80 cents per book. So there's a wide amount of savings that Kenya can have between $5 and 80 cents for a book. So
You're printing them yourself?
we're printing them ourselves. Well, there's a printer.
Oh, no, I got that. But you didn't buy USAID books, you didn't buy...
No, we haven't had time to talk about this, but we worked with the ministry to redesign, take their curriculum, make it scope and sequence, well designed, I think carefully thought through, bilingual instructional methods for class 1 and 2, for 80 cents. Now, it doesn't include, we don't have to pay authors, right? So there are royalties in this book market that they have to pay, but there's no profit that they have to pay. And there's no, can you not videotape this word? There's no kickback that's happening in our books, right? So there's some significant margin in some other market things. I hope no one sees this. Okay, so overall costs, we have different categories. If it goes below, that means we're less than the ministry. If it's above, we're more than the ministry. And these are per kid costs on average across the program. So because of this, we're saving about $2 per kid per book. We're spending more on TAC tutor training. TAC tutor is a guy who's responsible for 15 schools. We're actually spending less on supervision, even though one of the classes training. We have $2 more per kid on tuition, which makes sense because we're doing 10 days. And then we have teachers' guides and they don't. So which one is more expensive in total? Can you guess? The amazing thing is actually what we're doing is a little bit cheaper than the existing system, primarily because the book costs are so much less. So that even though we're training teachers and we're getting to the field, because the book costs are less, we're actually saving a bit per kid. So as a result, what's the cost effectiveness per dollar? And fluency rates, which I'm not sure is the best way to think about cost effectiveness. For an additional dollar of expenditure, you're getting that much more for English and Kiswahili. This one I think is more interesting, which is the percentage of kids at the benchmark. For every $100 that the program spent, or the government would spend, you could get an additional 10 kids reading at benchmark. Those includes the ones who are already reading, right? But on top of those, you get another 10 kids reading at benchmark. Not as much as we want, but not a bad investment at the same time. So I'm going so slow. So I have an instructional decision-making case study that I want to walk you through. Again, coming from the qualitative point of view, I'll give you some quantitative evidence. The real question is, we've talked about training and we talked about outcomes, right? The real question is, what was the causal link between the training and the outcome? And that's a real question, isn't it? Because there are many ways that behavior could change that would result in outcomes. So we really want to understand how this happened and how it can happen most efficiently. So we created on the DFID funded side of our project several different treatment groups. Let me just walk you through these. There are 3 of them. One is the full primer program, which is what we've basically talked about so far, which is you give the teachers training, you give the kids books, and you give the teachers lesson plans. Okay? We have another treatment group where the teachers get training and the kids get books, but you don't give them lesson plans. Why do we do that? Because the government system right now is that the teachers should write their own lessons. And so there's some resistance in our community there to people thinking about writing lessons. That's the art of teaching. I actually found some article I wrote when I was a second-year doctoral student about the mistake of scripted lessons and the disaster it's going to create to the quality of education in Africa. So this was Ben 10 years ago. And then there's one group where they just get the training and no books or lesson plans. So we wanted to see in those comparisons what were the instructional design decisions that a teacher would make after our training and what are some of the implications for instruction. So there's a lot of similarities. All 3 of those groups got some people who were training materials. All 3 of them got the same amount of TAC tutor instructional support, so they all were in schools visiting. They all got 10 days of training. All 3 groups were focused on instructional improvement. We were really focusing heavily on how quality would improve. And all 3 groups had TAC tutors using tablets to observe instruction and collect data and give feedback to the teacher. So these are our participants. We actually have some control teachers as well. We did kind of in-depth case study approach where we're following these teachers, observing them, interviewing them, trying to understand how they make decision-making practices. There's pretty decent spread over experience and years and qualifications across the groups. So what do we find? Interestingly, and not quite what I expected, all 3 groups and all teachers in all 3 groups were trying. Okay? There wasn't a real difference in the amount they were trying, which was actually a surprise to us. There's varying degrees of fidelity, but that didn't differ by treatment. So if you had a lesson plan or didn't mean you weren't trying, or weren't trying to follow the structure. And there was actually, this is one of the things we were actually surprised by. We thought that those teachers who had teachers' guides wouldn't spend as much time preparing because it's already prepared, right? But actually found very little differences, at least on self-reported preparation time. We'd like to do a little bit more to actually observe ourselves how much they actually prepare, but they all said, oh, we prepare for an hour. So if you believe that. Anyway, so we should look into that more this year. So in change in instructional time, we asked them, and how much more time do you spend teaching than you used to spend? And the ones who are training only said we spend actually less time. The ones who had the books but without the teacher's guides said they spent more time, and these ones were kind of a mixture. The full primer and the other ones spent the same amount of time. So this was also a surprise. We thought that instructional time would be heavier for those who are using the full primer, because the teachers are used to doing like a 10-minute lesson. You teach on addition for the day. I gave you 5 problems of addition in the front. Then you all do 20 problems of addition. So actual instruction is probably, on average, on our evaluation, is probably 10 to 12 minutes. But at least reportedly, there wasn't a change in instructional time. But we did analysis of their instructional behavior in classrooms, what methods they used, and we saw some pretty significant differences. Then in the control groups, we continue to see them using syllables and doing some basic vocab, read alouds, and reading, oral reading, and then some recall comprehension. And then the full primer and the books only, trying all these much more frequently and much more successfully. And then the real struggle, but they were trying, was on these phonological awareness for training only, where they had been trained by us to make sure that the kids understand how to segment and how to blend and how to do more complicated vocabulary tasks. They were trying, but this means so-so. They didn't do great. So we did see kind of some mediated effects on instruction as we made the comparisons between groups. So now we have an analysis of the effect size. Now, this is 4 months of teaching, okay? So don't get excited or unexcited by your favorite treatment group. But who wants to guess which one had the biggest effect? Full primer, books and training, or training only? Yes?
Books and training.
Books and training. Someone else want to go another way? Full primer. Someone else want to go for training only?
Let's go for it.
Yes, thank you. So we have English, Kiswahili, Maths, and overall. For English, full primer, the other two had no effect, statistically. For Kiswahili, full primer, the other two had no effect. Maths, the other two had no effect. Overall, the other two had no effect. I thought that the full primer in books and training would be almost the same. We'll see what happens over time, but at least initially it does cause us to want to do more research to understand if we can improve the instructional delivery for those who have these books. So, we also did an ICT study trying to look at some of the instructional behavior modification programs that we're looking at. So we did a randomized control trial again of 3 different ICT programs. With one level was for all the kids in these 20 schools to have an e-reader. Okay? That e-reader had 220 Kiswahili, English, and Dolu. This is one of the mother tongues in the western part of Kenya. Books on there. They used the book for their teaching, but they had a lot of after-school activities. They could actually eventually take the e-reader home. We did this in collaboration with World Reader, which is an NGO that does this sort of thing. The second the second treatment group was for teachers. This teacher had a tablet, and the lesson plans were on the tablet. The tablet was equipped with a continuous assessment task, where after every lesson I was supposed to read with 4 kids and see how they're doing based on their performance, and would give me feedback on which lesson to reteach and which kids to focus on. As well as a tool that had sound practice. A lot of teachers struggle in the differences in letter sounds across languages. I can actually show you afterwards if you have some interest. The third one is a tablet for the TAC tutors, which is where they have a task, something called Tangerine to read with kids. They have the tablet has a lesson plan, so they're tracking along with the teachers as they're teaching the lesson. So these are the 3 ICT treatment groups. We were actually very interested in seeing which one had most effect and which one was most cost effective. So this is the details. We had the comparisons were each of these against control and each of them against each other. So who here knows the ICT in education literature? No one wants to answer that yet, right? The literature I've read is pretty pessimistic about ICT's ability to improve outcomes, at least in these short-term guidance. One of the differences is that our program was embedded in something that had already shown some success. So, effect sizes. So which one do you think, well, first question, which of these do you think worked, and which ones do you think worked better? Did they work, and which one worked better? Well, everyone's shy now.
All of them worked.
All of them worked. Which one worked better?
The first one was children.
Children. Okay. Another guess? TAC tutors. Work better. Okay? Let's find out. So in English, this is effect size. You see that effect size for the e-reader? 0.36. Is that good or bad? That's fantastic. If you think about effect sizes in our field, that's very high. Teacher tablet, 0.5 and 0.4. Tech tutor tablet, 0.4 and 0.4. So did they work? Yes, all three of them work very well. Which one worked better? It's actually a trick. Your stats professor would always ask you to check on the statistical significance of the differences, and there aren't any. So they didn't work they weren't any different from each other. So, and this program is our basic primer program, so about 24 standard deviations. So for comparison, this is now the instructional improvement things using ICT. This is that other meta-analysis from McEwen. So this is the e-reader program where it would fit. This is the teacher tablet program, and this is the tech tutor tablet program. So they're all relatively significant in comparison to others. Yes, sir.
Those effect sizes, they were against the control then?
They're all against the control.
And what was the condition of the control?
The control got
Control
nothing.
what?
The control got nothing at all.
You mean no teaching, no, they could go to school?
They went to school. Thank you. They went to school. The teachers were using the typical books, because this is in Kisumu County, which is a relatively well-off county, so the ratio of books was about 2 to 1. They were teaching pretty consistently, both English and Kiswahili. English is kind of a language of pride for that area. They are well known for being strong English speakers, and actually did pretty well in English compared to the rest of the country. But Kiswahili is a bit of a challenge in the subject.
Thank you.
Was it on top of the primer or separate from the primer?
All three treatments did the primer approach. So they're using the same lesson plan,
So
same.
this is the impact on top of the primer?
This is their impact against control.
Ah,
What we have here, if you go back, this treatment group, the tech tutor tablet group, was basically the primer group. There wasn't any fundamental difference other than the tablet, which not all of the groups had.
so how do you separate the impact of ICT from the primer?
We can't quite do that. We needed a fourth treatment group, which every time I present this, people remind me, but
Okay.
it's a point of pain. We did need another treatment group. So ICT costs, I need to wrap this up. Cost per pupil. So the average program for 2 languages is around $4.50. That's the base program. And when you divide the cost of the tablet up by all the kids in the zone, okay? So you have 1 tablet for a tech tutor. You divide up the cost and the airtime and all that. Per kid, how much does it cost? Tablet costs $250 per kid. 10 cents. Per kid, the teacher's tablet costs about $3 per kid. The e-reader costs $40. Actually, it costs $70, but I use a lower number just to make it. As these e-readers go down, that should be the cost in 2014. So the per pupil cost is fundamentally different depending on what ICT you add. So what's the gain in reader per $100? I think you'll know the answer to this one ahead of time. Which one is most cost effective? Obviously the tech tutor tablet, because costs are so much different. So basically, you're buying 8 additional readers in the tech tutor tablet program, 4 for the teacher tablet, and half a kid for the people who read. Even though the instructional method is successful, the real thing that drives differences is cost. So, I'm wrapping up. Reflections on this research in general. Teacher change is quite complicated, and we are taking one particular target of how to help teachers make change. We think that the evidence is suggesting that teachers' guides or lesson plans, depending on how you conceive of them, can help teachers as their scaffolding change of the initial part. But the decisions we make have to consider take-up. If we do programs that are beautiful and will impress our grad school colleagues, but they don't get teachers to do them, what impact have we had? And so I'm in a real struggle because I went through grad school. I have good friends who believe in very sophisticated things instructionally. And when they talk, they hear some of the simplified methods we're using, they're like, what about all this? But I'm worried about take-up. So we've seen some significant impacts on learning. There's small differences between the ICT groups. Cost really matters when it comes to ICT. I'm talking from a country where Kenya has just decided to do a 1 laptop per class 1 child program. So in 2014, apparently, every kid in the country is going to have a laptop. So our research is either right on time or 1 year too late. We need to make instruction the conversation. I think one of the things we've helped happen inside the ministry is have us talk about the quality of instruction. The holy grail to me would be if people were evaluated on instruction. So if the quality assurance officer was evaluated on the quality of instruction in the district, and the same for the tech tutor. But we're getting there. We really have tried to simplify the work, have the process of teacher training simple. If you do this, outcomes can change, and really focus on Monday. Really focus on the classroom after the training is done, help the teachers implement. So with that, I want to thank you very much for this chance to talk through this.
That was more territory than usually gets covered, so you may be floating between things. But anybody like to start it off? Please identify yourself.
Hello, this is Maria. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about sustainability of the program. I'd like more about how you collaborate with the Ministry of Education.
Yeah, we made some decisions that are fundamentally about sustainability and about the ability of this program to be done by the government. So we're using all government people. So the training is done by the tech tutor, the supervision is done by the tech tutor, except in the non-formal schools, which I didn't have much time to talk about, which are kind of the low-cost private schools in the slums, where we have our own coaches. But we're trying to test a program using their system, using their delivery methods and models, using their budgets, so that when we're finished, it can be scaled up. But some processes have happened since then that have maybe helped sustainability from one perspective, maybe not another. USA and DFID have now decided to collaborate in the next 5-year budgets and do this program at a national scale. So it'll happen through the government system, but with additional funding from those two buildings. And actually GP, if you know GP, Global Partnership for Education, is actually planning on scaling it up on the math side. The USA DFID is just the literacy side. So that's, from my point of view, that's very exciting, because we're thrilled to be able to see that there's enough interest in what we've been doing to want to scale up to a larger scale and to have the ministry and the donors collaborate on funding to make that happen.
Please. You are.
Ruchira Goswami, International Education Development Program. The thing is, you've emphasized in your presentation that follow-up is essential. Now, let's say if you have 10 days for teacher training for the whole year, how do you divide the days for teacher training across the year?
That's a great idea. Great question.
I have another question.
Let's stay with this one.
Okay.
So for that one, I think we've tried different models on that. We have been doing a 5-3-2 breakdown, so 5 before the first term, 3 before the second term, and 2 before the third term. And the second and the third trainings are always redesigned every year based on what the teachers are struggling with that year, which differs because we've redesigned all our materials 5 times. So we can't use the same training manuals at all. But that 5-day training is everyone always says it's too short. But I'd rather spend the money on them follow than have them sit for another week and not do it in classrooms. There's actually one program that they presented at CIS. I really like their idea of actually having kids come to the training, so actually practicing on kids rather than practicing on each other. So that's something we might try for next year.
My name is Rachel Jordan. I'm part of the International Education Development Program. I'm wondering, when you first started in the beginning implementing the PRIMR program, obviously you and the people that developed PRIMR knew sort of best practices for teacher training, and it did translate on the classroom level, which you see with your impact evaluation. So if you're working with TAC tutors within the ministry, how many tutors did you have to train? What was their background, and then what were your best practices for training those teacher trainers?
Yeah. So in January this year, we trained 74 tech tutors. So these 1,380 schools are 74 people getting to all that. Those people are coming from a variety of backgrounds and have a wide variety of skill levels. So some of them, when you give them a tablet to help them do instructional supervision, they don't have a cell phone. So Nexus tablet seems a bit intimidating. So we actually have made some pretty significant scale downs from the complexity of the first and second round of materials because of how difficult it was for some of our tech tutors to read. As I said, some of these counties have different language backgrounds, So we found in last year's training that teachers were really struggling. Tech tutors, who were the trainers, were really struggling either to read English or Kiswahili or mother tongue. So we said, we can't keep it this way, so we really scaled back the complexity of the written teacher's guide as a result. But I really believe in randomization. You get what you get. So we're trying to mimic what it's like in a real setting. Some tech tutors are enthusiastic. Some of them, it's like you're doing them a favor to have them go to schools. A lot of them are not. Well, the tech tutor system in Kenya has been in existence for quite a while. For the last 10 years, it has not been about instruction. So they've become like another cog in the administrative system. So we've been working with the Teacher Service Commission to help these tech tutors do their job. Their job description says instructional support, but they're literally never in schools. So many of them think that is below them, that I'm a boss, because they are the boss of the teachers, and I shouldn't go to classes, particularly class 1. So we really have had to struggle with a lot of attitudes that this is below them. But that's a fundamental part of our job, I think, is to increase the focus on instructional support and then help the system to reevaluate how they do the admin stuff. Because it turns out that we haven't been able to get them to change the job of the tech tutor at all. The tech tutor's job is still the same. It's kind of a balance between instruction and district admin support. But these tech tutors have done now all this classroom observation and their normal job, and done both. So they've doubled productivity, maybe, without, and there's no other cost to that change. I think we've seen at least many of them, most of them, have been excited about classroom support.
So I'd like to, I know there are other questions, and we'll get to them. I want to ask a question. Let's say we're in Philadelphia, and we were not internationally oriented. I was the head of schools and under pressure, like is the case in Philadelphia, head of the school superintendent. And what would the Kenya study, would there be any generalizable things you could say to me about what you learned that we could think about? I guess it's part of the same question that somebody might say, well, how would it play in South Africa? But I'm asking, how would it play in Philadelphia?
I think it's the focus. I think we've done anything else. A focus on instruction is to have a system that is really about getting different levels of the system to go to classrooms and talk about classrooms and focus on teaching and help teachers. And I think, at least from my experience in urban school districts in the U.S., it doesn't happen to the level we're doing it. These people are in schools every day. They have, unlike the reading coach in the school I was at when I was a 4th grade and an 8th grade teacher who had one school, these people have 15, but they're seeing a lot of classrooms. And then first focus on instruction, and then second, kind of some of the different things we haven't had time to talk about around how you interact around instruction. So we have the collaborative groups amongst teachers, one-on-one sessions, we have the community meetings where they're talking about outcomes. So just kind of changing the conversation to being around quality improvement in manageable ways for the teacher. So they're getting both some credit for the changes they're making, but also getting some support as they try and scaffold their way out. But to be honest, I came from that other conference that we talked about earlier, just before CIS. It's called SRE, Society for Research and Educational Effectiveness. And I went to a bunch of panels on literacy and numeracy outcomes and the effects in the US. The effect sizes for what people are excited about in US research and costs. It was a shock to my system. I had forgotten. And people were jumping up and down for a 0.1 standard deviation effect size that costs $350 per kid. And that just kind of jolted me.
Up and down.
Yeah, so I don't think the stuff we're doing is new. And basically the argument these people were making is that everyone is doing what the National Reading Panel has said is good for literacy instruction in America. So it's hard to add more of that and get that level of effect.
Okay, I think, let's go 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
And you are?
Nathan Castillo, doctoral student in Interdisciplinary Studies and Development program here. Thank you for your talk. Couple quick questions. Your randomization at the zonal level, you talk a little bit about your justification behind randomizing intervention at that level, and then also your teacher change data. What were your data sources that you used for that?
So
let me take several questions at once and see what Adam.
Okay.
You are?
Adam Satz from International Educational Development Program. I'm wondering if at all, or how much, the Ministry of Education, the TAP tutors, and the teachers themselves were involved in the design of any of the professional development.
Yeah. That's, can I take that? I'll forget the name.
Oh, okay, I forgot.
That one's the easier one to answer than yours.
Okay.
All of our materials were developed with a cross-sectoral team from ministry. So we have representatives from all the directors, senior people, as well as the curriculum body, and the exams body, and the teachers body, and then the training body. So everything we did, all the materials we developed, all the books and training stuff is all lined out with us. So I think that's actually one thing that did go well. It's helped us now that we have a successful program that's showing a real problem of cost, because everyone that was there at the beginning. Then your first question? I told you I forget. Randomization. I really feel strongly about this one. I get that question a lot. Why did you randomize at the zone level? If you're going to do something that's sustainable in a system that has an instructional coach or something at the zone level, these programs that randomize at the school level are messing themselves up. If you randomize at the school level, but your system level support person is higher than them, either you're contaminating your own study by using them to support that school, but supposedly not the school next to it, or you're replicating the system by hiring somebody to support a school. So that one I think is a pretty big deal, to randomize at the school level, the zone level, sorry. But the challenge then is that you have to worry about your standard errors being clustered, not only at the school, but also clustered at the zone. So the things that, from a researcher point of view, if you randomize lower, you don't have as much standard error clustering, as you have a greater likelihood of showing effect. So we had to have a big effect, otherwise we would have seen no effect because of how powerful the study was. You know?
And the data sources for the...
Yeah, we have done thousands of classroom observations. For all of our studies, every time you go to school, you basically observe a class 1 and class 2 teacher in English, Kiswahili, and math. We've done that for a lot of times over a lot of years. We have a lot of teacher instruction data. That's just my interest, so we're swimming in it. Actually, I need some people to help with that.
It's solely based on observation, past observation.
We have interviews with the teachers, so we have a wide range of things. We're asking them about how they're receiving the materials and what they're struggling with, as well as kind of their overall views, attitudes, beliefs on when kids should be able to do stuff, whose responsibility it is for a kid to do this as the parents. We're trying to get at whether or not the teachers, what's their attribution theory? Are they attributing success or failure to themselves or to the teacher? Assuming for the kid, as well as matching that with instructional data.
Any sense of how that turned out? There was just a report this morning on NPR on grit and the role of whether kids are responsible for their own lack or showing of motivation versus parents and teachers.
We haven't done that analysis yet, but it does seem that from my perspective, it has, I studied attribution theory in grad school and think about that's some of the reason for underachievement for particular groups, at least in part. There's a lot of blaming these dull kids. The teacher telling the head teacher, I would do well, but you gave me all these dullers that can't even work for, anyway, these slow children. So as opposed to this is something that can. On the other hand, we have a lot of teachers say at the end of the year, got a yearly interview, that I never knew that these kids could do so much, because as we've seen, the gains are pretty fast and substantial.
Hi, my name is Jessica Ping from the Education, Culture, and Society program. I wanted to ask you more a little bit about the community demand aspect of the project and what it looks like and who you're working with in the community.
Yeah, community demand, we are doing kind of a multi-pronged thing. This is actually heavier in the non-formal, low-cost private school sector, where we have instructional coaches who work for us, who do classroom observations in the day. In the afternoon, they're meeting with the chief of the area and trying to get them to buy in. We have reading contests every month where you get all the kids in the schools and they do a contest and you get little prizes. We have some reading library activities, monthly reading bazaar for just to get people excited about just trying to build up the culture of reading. But to me, the goal is to increase the percentage of kids who have someone to read with them at home, either read aloud or read it to them. That's been really hard to do, but I'm actually interested in the research of some of our other colleague organizations who are doing more on that. There's actually a new trial in Rwanda that will have that as a treatment arm. They have an instructional intervention called Literacy Boost, and then another program on top of that where they do a lot of community activities. So I'm really interested to see how that turns out, whether or not they're actually able to. It's very important whether or not you can easily make a change on that using external intervention. I'm very interested in it. Because we haven't, that hasn't been the most successful part of our program, honestly.
I noticed that I think that people have had to sort of ingest a lot, and you have some time, and some people I know want to see you. I think we could wrap this up, and I want to say a couple of things. One is that my observation at these meetings we were just at are that one of them was that this is one of the most exciting projects in the field right now in international education. I was interested to hear, and maybe I will pursue this more with you, about what others can learn from this and how applicable this approach is, because it's really one of the exciting things that's happening in the field. And the second is, some of you may or may not know, is that we've recently tied up an agreement with your organization, Research Triangle Institute, and we're hoping that several of our students in IEDP will go work with Ben and others in RTI projects, particularly in Africa. So I think I will just say, on behalf of everybody, thank you one more time, and let's give another round of applause.